Welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be delving into the world of Fyodor Dostoevsky with you. More specifically, we're honing in on excerpts from Crime and Punishment, the ones you chose for us to look at today.
It's kind of like we're curating a Dostoevsky experience just for you. We'll be exploring his work, through the lens of your own questions and curiosities.
I love that. Now, Crime and Punishment, it's this massive, intense novel, right? But we're not going to try to tackle all of it today. Nope.
Oh,
We're all about those hand-picked passages, so no worries if you haven't read the whole thing. Tell me, what was it about these particular excerpts that drew you in? What are we hoping to uncover together today?
well, it seems like you're fascinated by Dostoevsky's darker side, the psychological torment, the moral dilemmas, the way his characters, struggle with poverty and guilt. All those things are kind of woven through the selections you made.
Yeah, Dostoevsky doesn't shy away from the shadows, does he? And speaking of shadows, we have this really interesting bit about Dostoevsky's own life, his mock execution and imprisonment. It's amazing to me how this experience kind of echoes throughout his writing.
Oh, it's huge. That experience, imagine facing death, then being spared, only to be thrown into the brutal reality of Siberian prison life. The suffering, the isolation. It's no wonder those themes kind of permeate his work.
Right, and when we look at the excerpts from Crime and Punishment that you pick, particularly those focused on Raskolnikov, I mean, the parallels are striking.
Yeah.
Living in poverty, isolated, completely on edge. There's even that line where he's dreading meeting anyone.
Mm.
Makes you wonder if Dostoevsky, poured some of his own trauma into this character.
It's certainly possible. A lot of critics see Raskolnikov as kind of a literary vessel for Dostoevsky's own psychological struggles. But it's not a simple one-to-one thing. Dostoevsky was a master at exploring all the complexities of what it means to be human.
So maybe Raskolnikov is a reflection of one aspect of Dostoevsky's experience, or maybe it's a deliberate contrast, like a way for Dostoevsky to kind of work through those dark emotions through fiction.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so interesting. It's not about finding simple answers, but about uncovering all those layers of meaning and interpretation that Dostoevsky so brilliantly weaves into his work.
Okay, speaking of layers, let's talk about the setting.
Yeah.
St. Petersburg. It's more than just a backdrop in these excerpts. It's almost like another character, this oppressive force bearing down on everyone.
It's almost as if St. Petersburg itself is a manifestation of the character's inner turmoil, right?
Yeah.
There's that passage you picked out where Raskolnikov describes the city, the stifling heat, the stench, the drunken men staggering around. He even calls it the revolting misery of the picture.
Oh, it's so visceral. It makes me feel suffocated just reading it.
Right. And Dostoevsky uses those sensory details to draw us into Raskolnikov's headspace. He's already on edge, crushed by poverty and alienation, and then he's bombarded by this awful environment. It's like the city itself is pushing him towards some kind of breaking point.
And then there's Raskolnikov himself. The excerpts you picked really highlight the contradictions in this guy. He's described as handsome, intelligent, even refined. But then he's crushed by poverty, he's talking to himself, and it's clear he's teetering on the brink of something dangerous.
Right. That tension, that inner turmoil, it's at the core of his character. And we see it so clearly in that pawn shop encounter you chose, the one where he's pawning his father's watch. That detail about the watch, it hints at a deeper backstory, maybe an emotional wound even.
There's a powerful scene. You really sense his desperation, his anger at the pawnbroker, at his situation. It's like he feels entitled to more, but he's trapped in this cycle of poverty and despair.
And that sense of entitlement is key. It fuels this idea that he's above the rules somehow, that he can justify extreme measures to escape his circumstances. It foreshadows his justification for murder later on, this whole extraordinary man thing.
Right, that extraordinary man theory. It's such a crucial concept in Dostoevsky's work, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's this idea that certain people, geniuses, people with incredible willpower, are above conventional morality, that they have the right to break the rules. And we see the seeds of that belief planted here in these early excerpts, even before Porphyry explicitly brings it up.
It's like Dostoevsky's giving us a glimpse into the warped logic that will eventually lead Raskolnikov to commit murder. But then there's this other side of him, too, this flicker of compassion. This is discomfort with the depths of human suffering. It's there in the way he reacts to Marmeladov in the tavern.
Marmeladov, he's an interesting character, especially when you consider him in relation to Raskolnikov. Here's this guy, totally degraded, consumed by alcohol, yet clinging to this really poignant love for his family.
It's such a stark contrast to Raskolnikov's isolation. He's surrounded by people but feels totally alone. Yet he's drawn to Marmeladov's story, almost like he recognizes something of himself in this broken man.
And that's where the idea of a foil comes in. A foil is a character who, through contrast, highlights certain qualities in another character. In this case, Marmeladov's, his degradation, but also his unwavering love for his family. It throws Raskolnikov's isolation and moral ambiguity into sharper relief. It makes us question, is Raskolnikov capable of that kind of love? Is he truly as heartless as he seems?
Dostoevsky loved to play with these kinds of contrasts, didn't he? It's like he's forcing us to confront the full spectrum of human experience, the good, the bad, all mixed up together.
And that brings us to one of the most prominent themes in your chosen excerpts, suffering. It's everywhere from Raskolnikov's grinding poverty to Marmeladov's self-destruction, even to that image of the beaten horse in Raskolnikov's dream.
That dream, so vivid, so disturbing, clearly foreshadowing the violence to come. But it also speaks to some deeper torment within Raskolnikov. I'd love to hear your take on that.
Well, it's fascinating how this dream connects to Dostoevsky's own philosophical beliefs. He saw suffering not just as something to be endured, but as a potential path to redemption. It's a tough concept. But for Dostoevsky, suffering could be a crucible, a way to purify the soul, lead to a deeper understanding of oneself and the world.
So you're saying that Raskolnikov's suffering, even the suffering he inflicts on others, could actually lead to his redemption?
It's certainly a possibility, and that's what makes these excerpts so compelling. They offer a glimpse into the beginning of Raskolnikov's journey, a journey that will be marked by immense suffering, both self-inflicted and imposed upon him. It's through that crucible of suffering that Dostoevsky explores the possibility of redemption. The idea that even the darkest deeds can be atoned for, through genuine repentance and a real transformation of the soul.
Wow. That's a lot to process. And we haven't even gotten to the murder itself. The excerpts you chose end right as Raskolnikov is about to encounter Lizaveta, the pawnbroker's sister. We know it's coming, but it's like Dostoevsky is leaving us hanging on this cliff, this moment of terrible anticipation.
He was brilliant at suspense. Even in these fragments, he creates this sense of dread, this feeling of inevitability. He pulls us into the psychological labyrinth of Raskolnikov's mind, making us face the darkness within him and maybe, within ourselves.
I'm hooked. Can't wait to see what happens next.
Well, that's where our deep dive continues in part 2. We'll dig into the aftermath of the murder, explore Raskolnikov's descent into guilt and paranoia, and uncover the complex relationships that shape his path.
Buckle up, listeners. It's going to be a wild ride.
So picking up right where we left off, those excerpts you picked, dealing with Raskolnikov right after the murder. Wow, Dostoevsky really cracks open his skull there, doesn't he? Lets us peer right into the storm raging inside.
It's intense,
Yeah.
right? All the guilt, the paranoia. That scene where he goes back to his room and he's like obsessively washing his hands, scrubbing the axe. It's more than just getting rid of the evidence. It's like he's trying to scrub away the deed itself, but he can't.
Exactly. The blood might be gone, but that stain on his soul, that's there to stay. And Dostoevsky makes sure we don't forget it, not for a second. That near confession to his landlady, remember that? Standing on the stairs, he almost spills it all out, but then retreats back into himself.
Right. It's like he's torn between this urge to confess and this terror of what'll happen if he does. So powerful, that internal struggle, and Dostoevsky captures it perfectly.
It shows how well he understood the human psyche. Guilt, it's not simple. It's this whole web of fear, regret, even a messed up kind of pride. And Raskolnikov, he's got it all.
And then he gets sick, right? That whole sequence, it's obviously more than just physical. It's like his mind and soul are breaking down too.
It's like the guilt is eating him alive, literally. Delirious, in and out of consciousness, haunted by these jumbled memories and anxieties. Dostoevsky's showing us the true cost of his crime. He's not just some cold-blooded killer. He's this messed up young man being crushed by what he did.
You realize that sometimes the punishment starts way before any judge gets involved.
Totally, and that's where Razumihin comes in, right? You picked some excerpts that show how loyal he is to Raskolnikov, bringing him food, trying to get him to eat, just being there even though Raskolnikov pushes him away.
Razumihin is such a good guy in all this darkness. So sincere, so caring, almost like a kid with his optimism. Makes you wonder how someone like Raskolnikov could have a friend like that.
It says a lot about how complex human relationships can be, doesn't it? Even in all that chaos, there's still real connection, true loyalty. Dostoevsky might be hinting that even someone like Raskolnikov, after what he did, isn't beyond saving, not beyond kindness.
And speaking of kindness, there's also that part you picked where it's clear Razumihin's got a thing for Dunya, Raskolnikov's sister. Bit of a lighter moment there in all the tension.
It is, and it kind of hints at something more going on there, which we see later in the novel. But even here, we see how Dunya, she's smart, strong-willed. She represents a possible path for Raskolnikov.
Like a symbol of hope, maybe.
Exactly. She has the things Raskolnikov seems to lack: compassion, selflessness, a strong moral compass. It's like Dostoevsky saying maybe through her, Raskolnikov can climb out of the hole he's dug for himself.
Amazing how Dostoevsky plants these little hints, setting the stage for what's coming.
A master of foreshadowing, for sure. But let's not forget the outside pressure on Raskolnikov, too. Those excerpts with Zamatov and Porfiry Petrovich, the investigators, closing in on him.
That back and forth between Raskolnikov and Porfiry, it's so gripping. Those scenes where they're questioning him, trying to get in his head. Pure psychological warfare.
And what's interesting is how Dostoevsky shows the investigation. It's not just about clues and evidence, it's about mind games. Porfiry, he's smart. He knows the key to catching Raskolnikov is figuring out how he thinks, using his guilt and paranoia against him.
Raskolnikov tries to act cool, but you can tell he's scared. He knows they're onto him, looking over his shoulder constantly.
So much tension, and it all leads up to that scene where Porfiry hits him with the extraordinary man theory. Classic Dostoevsky. You picked it out, smart move.
Like a philosophical duel. Porfiry's playing with him, teasing him with this idea that some men are above the law, above morality. And you see how that idea got into Raskolnikov's head, how he used it to justify what he did.
Brilliant strategy by Porfiry. He's not just trying to get confession, he's trying to break down Raskolnikov's whole belief system, make him face the consequences of what he did on a moral level.
And it really shakes him, this confrontation. He starts to doubt himself, question his own beliefs, a turning point for him.
For sure. And from there, it's all downhill for Raskolnikov. Guilt, paranoia gets worse and worse. He's not just hiding from the police, he's hiding from himself, from the monster he's become.
Like things weren't bad enough, there's also what happens with the Marmeladov family.
Ugh, yeah. The excerpts you picked, they show how much they suffer. Katerina Ivanovna, Marmeladov's wife, she's tragic. So proud, trying to keep her family together, but totally broken by their situation. And then Marmeladov dies. Just heartbreaking.
Reminds us that the suffering in this novel, it goes beyond just Raskolnikov. It's about the poverty, the injustice that crushes people like the Marmeladovs.
And yet, even with all that despair, we see moments of compassion. Like that scene where Raskolnikov, even though he's a murderer, gives Katerina Ivanovna money for the funeral.
Such a complex moment, right? It shows he's not all bad. He can empathize, even be kind, which makes his whole downfall even sadder.
Exactly. Dostoevsky doesn't give us easy answers, simple characters. He makes us confront the contradictions in ourselves, the good and bad in everyone.
And then, boom, we meet Svidrigailov. Now there's a character. So creepy right from the start.
Oh, he's fascinating and super disturbing. The excerpts you picked, they show how predatory he is, especially with Dunya.
His propositions to her, even after his wife dies, so suspicious. It's just unsettling.
That ambiguity around his wife's death, classic Dostoevsky. We never know for sure if he did it, which makes him even scarier.
He's like the dark side of what Raskolnikov's struggling with. Everything Raskolnikov could become if he totally gives in to that extraordinary man idea and says screw it to morality.
Exactly. Svidrigailov is a warning. What happens when ambition and nihilism run wild? He's the path Raskolnikov might have gone down if he didn't have any guilt or humanity left.
And I noticed you included a few parts about ghosts in the afterlife. Seems like Dostoevsky was really wrestling with that stuff.
He was. Remember that line where Svidrigailov describes ghosts as shreds and fragments of other worlds? That's pure Dostoevsky, his own spiritual and philosophical struggles. He was deeply religious, but he also doubted, questioned things.
And how does that tie back to Raskolnikov?
Well, think about it. Raskolnikov's haunted by his own guilt, his isolation. He's living in this psychological otherworld because of what he did, cut off from everyone, tormented by his conscience. It's like he's already crossed over into this realm of suffering, a kind of living hell he created for himself.
But even in that hell, there's some light. You picked that scene with Sonia reading to him from the Bible, the story of Lazarus coming back from the dead.
Pivotal scene. Sonia, with her faith and her compassion, she's like a possible path to redemption for him. She believes he can change, that his soul can be, resurrected from all that despair.
Sonia's so interesting. She's a prostitute, forced into it, but she has this pure, selfless love.
Yeah.
It's like she sees the good in him, even when he can't see it himself.
And that's the thing about her love. It's unconditional. She gives him a lifeline, some hope in all that darkness. Through her, he starts to understand that redemption isn't about justifying what he did. It's about owning up to it, asking for forgiveness.
Seems like Dostoevsky's saying that even the worst sinner, someone who did something truly awful, can still find grace, can still be redeemed.
Exactly. It's a big theme in his work. He believed that to find redemption, you got to face your darkest parts, take responsibility, and accept that suffering can lead to transformation, to repentance.
And speaking of transformation, we see that in how his relationship with his mother and sister changes. They're worried about him, but they also know something's wrong.
Yeah, those excerpts show the tension in the family. They love him, but they sense the darkness in him. And that scene where he finally confesses to Dunya. Wow, so raw, so emotional. A real turning point.
He can't keep it in anymore, can he? He has to tell someone, even if it means losing their love.
And by confessing, being vulnerable like that, he takes the first step towards redemption. He starts to climb out of that hole.
It's interesting, right, how telling his sister leads him to finally confess to the police. Like admitting it to someone who loves him opens the door to admitting it to everyone.
Powerful stuff. And his confession to the police, it's not just about the law, it's about facing his conscience. He's not just admitting the crime, he's saying it was wrong, that he violated his own moral code.
But even as he's confessing, he still holds on to that extraordinary man justification. Remember that line? That I killed a vile, noxious insect, an old pawnbroker woman, of use to no one.
It shows that he's accepting responsibility, but he's still struggling with the morality of it all, trying to make sense of what he did, reconcile this belief that he's special with the horror of his crime.
It's like he's stuck between two worlds, the world of his own twisted thinking and the world of compassion and morality. And it's Sonia who helps him bridge that gap.
Absolutely. She's the one who pushes him to seek forgiveness, not just from the law, but from God. She helps him see that real repentance goes beyond just admitting guilt. It requires a change of heart, a willingness to suffer, to be redeemed.
And even though he gets sent to Siberia, hard labor, there's still hope in those excerpts you chose. Like being imprisoned is nothing compared to the mental and emotional hell he's been through.
Totally. Physical hardship, it's almost a relief compared to all that guilt and isolation. It's like being punished outwardly lets him finally deal with the turmoil inside. And don't forget, Sonia goes with him.
Yeah, her love and faith, they really show how powerful human connection can be. Even a horrible place like that, love can give you hope, the strength to keep going.
And she reminds him constantly that he's not alone, that he's still worthy of love, of forgiveness. Through her, he learns that redemption's a journey, not a finish line. It's about constantly growing, changing for the better.
It's amazing, right? Dostoevsky takes us on this emotional roller coaster from despair to hope to redemption. That's what makes this work so powerful, so timeless.
He was a master of exploring what it means to be human in all its messiness. And even though we've only looked at a small part of the novel, I think we've uncovered some deep stuff about Raskolnikov's journey, about the questions Dostoevsky asks, about guilt, redemption, good and evil.
Couldn't agree more. What an incredible journey it's been, going through these passages with you. They clearly meant something to you. Looking back, what stands out the most for you now?
For me, it's how much he focuses on the possibility of redemption, even for a guy like Raskolnikov. Dostoevsky reminds us that we all have darkness and light inside us, and that even after doing something terrible, we can still change. We can still become better.
Powerful message. And I think we all need to hear that sometimes. It reminds us to be compassionate to ourselves and others, and to never give up hope, even when things are really bad.
And remember, this is just a peek into Dostoevsky's world. These excerpts, they give you a unique perspective, but there's so much more to crime and punishment than just these parts.
Totally. This deep dive has been a great way to start, to connect to these ideas in a personal way. But the invitation's always there, to explore more, to read the whole novel and discover everything it has to offer. Who knows what other insights, what other questions you might find along the way.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Exploration, questioning, engaging with the world. That's what Dostoevsky wants us to do.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Dostoevsky. We hope it's made you want to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep thinking about those big questions that really matter. You know, it's amazing to me how these little excerpts, these fragments really, of a much larger story have packed such an emotional punch. I mean, we've really walked with Raskolnikov every step of the way through his struggles, haven't we?
That's Dostoevsky for you, right? A master storyteller. He pulls you in, makes you feel what his characters are feeling, their pain, their hope, everything.
And their journey, yeah. Speaking of which, let's talk about how these excerpts end.
Yeah.
It's interesting, even though Raskolnikov ends up in Siberia, in prison, there's still this sense of hope, like a new beginning.
It's not about being punished, not in the traditional sense anyway. It's about, his soul, his morals being transformed. Remember that line? The new life would not be given him for nothing. Being in prison, it almost doesn't matter as much as the change that's happening inside him.
Like Siberia is less about punishment, more about a chance to face his demons, rebuild himself.
Exactly. That was central to Dostoevsky's thinking. True redemption, it often comes from suffering, from being willing to confront our darkest parts and coming out changed on the other side.
And his suffering in prison physically, it almost seems minor compared to all the mental and emotional anguish he went through before.
Right. It's like the physical stuff is a relief compared to the constant guilt and loneliness he had inside. The external punishment lets him finally deal with all that turmoil he was carrying. And let's not forget, Sonia goes with him.
Yeah, that's true love right there. Her faith, her dedication, it shows how powerful human connection can be, even in the worst place imaginable. Love can give you hope, keep you going.
And she's there to remind him that he's not alone, that he deserves love and forgiveness. She helps him understand that redemption, it's a process, not a one-time thing. It's about constantly working on yourself, becoming better.
So much packed into these excerpts. Suffering, guilt, redemption, the whole question of good versus evil. It's no wonder Dostoevsky's work still speaks to people after all this time.
He had this gift, for looking into the deepest parts of us, asking those big questions we've been wrestling with forever. And he does it in a way that makes you think, but also really feel it.
This has been an amazing deep dive. Going through these passages with you, it's clear they really resonated with you. Now that we've reached the end, what stands out the most for you? What do you take away from all this?
I think for me, what sticks out is that even someone like Raskolnikov, after what he did, can still find redemption. Dostoevsky shows us that we all have the capacity for darkness and light, and that even after our worst actions, there's still hope for change, for becoming a better person.
That's a message we could all use a reminder of sometimes, right? It's about being compassionate to ourselves and others and never giving up hope, no matter how tough things get.
And this is just a taste of what Dostoevsky created. These excerpts, they offer a unique window into his world, but there's so much more to crime and punishment waiting to be discovered.
This deep dive, it's been a fantastic place to start to connect with these powerful ideas in a personal way. But the journey doesn't have to end here. You can dive into the full novel, explore its depths and complexities. Who knows what other insights and questions you might find along the way.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's the beauty of Dostoevsky. He makes you want to explore, to question, to engage with the world and everything in it.
That's a wrap, folks. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive to the world of Dostoevsky. We hope it's inspired you to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those big questions at the forefront of your mind.